It's 7 o'clock. A very good evening to you. This is News at Prime. I'm Thembekile Mkhototo. Finance Minister Nkadimeng says that it is understandable that the public is opposed to Eskom's now withdrawn exemption. Treasury today made a temporary U-turn on the issue, which would have allowed the power utility to not report on wasteful and irregular expenditure in its financials. Nkadimeng believes the public's lack of trust in Eskom is fair and that corruption claims of the utility are being taken seriously.
Definitely a trust deficit around Eskom. And that explains why there's such a response by the public. It's precisely because of that trust deficit. There's no doubt about that. The question you're not going to trust is not something that is proclaimed. It's something that is going to be earned. So it's going to take time for Eskom to earn that trust from the public, precisely because of previous misconduct. That I understand and I appreciate.
Nkadimeng says he's concerned that Eskom still does not have a permanent CEO.
I'm not responsible for Eskom's operational activities. The Minister of Public Enterprises has got the line function responsibilities for Eskom. So as to what the process is for the CEO and so on, that is his responsibility. My worry, though, is that the absence of leadership in Eskom has got a direct bearing on the risks of Eskom. And therefore, from a financial perspective, we are worried because there's still a risk in the absence of a solid leadership with Eskom.
The organisation Undoing Tax Abuse has meanwhile welcomed government's decision to lift the state of disaster declaration on electricity. The group in February launched a legal challenge saying that it feared the disaster declaration would lead to the looting of public money, as witnessed in the COVID-19 pandemic. Outa's Wayne Duvenage believes that government has now made the right call.
Yes, so back, I think it was in beginning of February, in the President's State of the Nation address, he announced that a state of disaster for electricity or energy had been put into place. We had a good look at the reasons why. We looked at the history of what has been happening in the electricity crisis, decisions that were taken by the committees that had been set up, and there was no need for the state of disaster. We have all the mechanisms in place to deal with the emergency matters and get to fixing Eskom. In fact, they've been ignoring so much of that for a long time right now. So declaring a state of disaster was the wrong reason. And we've seen what happens in a state of disaster with the PPE during the COVID period, where it's almost a license to now go on a spending spree for the wrong reasons sometimes. It should tell us that there's a problem in decision-making at government at a national level. There is some either poor advice that is being given. There is not a focus on long-term consequences, on the impacts on society at large, that they're not putting the citizens and the country's best interests central to some of these decisions. And again, we have this wide trust deficit. In fact, the Edelman Trust Barometer shows that South Africa is the lowest trust in its government from a citizen point of view. This doesn't bode well for that. So it speaks to a government that's out of touch with the reality of the implications of some of these decisions they're making.
Cooperative Governance Minister Nkadimeng joins us more on the story tonight. Very good evening to you, Minister. Grateful for your time. So for those just catching up with this scrapping of the disaster declaration, explain what has led us to this point.
Well, thank you very much, Thembekile, and good evening to our viewers as well. What led to the scrapping of the state of disaster is because, in comparison from the time that it was declared, which was at the beginning of February, to date, quite a lot of progress have been made with regard to putting systems in place of ensuring that Eskom, amongst other key stakeholders and other government departments like environment, ourselves, CoGTA, are streamlined in such a way that they will be able to respond appropriately using the normal mechanisms of the law to ensure that there's sustainable provision of electricity to our communities.
But how does that factor into the bigger picture of why this declaration was needed in the first place, when you consider that even Eskom's management, including the now former CEO Andre de Ruyter, had previously said that there was an expectation that the situation around power availability, electricity availability, would have improved around this time this year?
The fact of the matter is that at the time in February, me and you know very well that we were actually close to a blackout, totally. And it was important for Cabinet and the President to sit closely and look at what could be done between that time and the time that Eskom anticipated there will be an improvement. What might have not been mentioned earlier would be we were not even all of us as citizens expecting a extensive rollout at the time to close almost to a blackout in a country. And we felt it is important, one, to look into what could be done urgently between that time of early February towards the end of March to prepare and ensure that there will be at least sufficient provision of what people could be able to live and work with under the circumstances. And remember, then it was only at the beginning of March that also President took a decision to appoint a Minister of Electricity, who's now working day to day with NECOM, which is one of our structures, and following our energy master plan to ensure that the 5 key pillars of that plan are looked and dealt with on a day-to-day basis.
So did government panic at the beginning of the year when it realized that we were now dealing with the regular levels of stage 5 and 6 power cuts? And that's why, even though there had been a forecast put out there that by March, early March, there'd be an improvement, there was still the implementation of a state of disaster and indeed the appointment of a minister specifically to be seized with the issue of electricity.
Well, I wouldn't call it a panic. I would call it appropriate action that is demanded at the time there is a circumstance in a country. And that is why the state of disaster by its own design says, look into your country all the time, look at all the challenges you have, look at whether the mechanisms you have, you can enhance them, you can accelerate them, and therefore declare accordingly. And that was what was made at the time. That's why these instruments and measures are there in the management of government to ensure that it is able to assist government as it interprets and it also delivers the services to the people. So it wouldn't be a panic. I mean, we come from Perth St. John's last week, a disaster that was not expected. We pulled everything from Sanral to ensure to fix the road and everything. You may call it a panic, but it's a necessary panic to ensure that our people and their lives are reverted back. So you declare disaster at each and every time, inform the situation on the ground to ensure that we better the lives of our people and make them relatively easier at the time of a disaster.
Well, this government has failed successively, to better the lives of South Africans on the electricity front for the better part of 15 years now in this country. And just after your briefing today on the energy situation, we then learned we're going back to stage 4. So can we really say things have got better when we are still seeing a fluctuating situation as far as where we stand on energy availability?
Well, our role as CoGTA is to coordinate to ensure that all the partners are on the table, all the partners are able to talk to one another faster and with ease to resolve a particular problem. And in this instance, it's energy provision to ensure and minimize load shedding. Yes, it will not be resolved in a day. As a Minister of Electricity, even in the afternoon, explain. We also explained that we may still review periodically, as we often do as government, and maybe at a particular time we still find that we still need to reintroduce again the state of disaster with regard to electricity provision to minimize the impact that it has. So it will periodically be necessary for that to be done.
Are you suggesting, ma'am, just on that point of clarity, are you suggesting that we may dip in and out of a disaster declaration?
Well, it's not to dip in and out. Disaster is to ensure that as government, over time, always we sit. We sit even today and watch what are the cholera cases growth? Are they there? Are they posing a threat to South Africans? And health will be saying to us, not at this level. And any other area, we will look into it. And electricity is one of them. We look into it on a day-to-day basis. So it's not a deep in, a deep out. You will recall even with COVID, there will be periods where we think, okay, it's relatively manageable, and then there will be a hike informed by particular, and then the measures will be different. So we are in a state where we need to be mindful of our electricity use, our energy provision, and ensuring entire mix that we have a sustainable provision as a country. If it's necessary, we may reintroduce it. If it's not, we will not.
Is it on that basis then that you realize that your case would not succeed in court as far as the challenge to the state of disaster declaration, which was already mounted against government?
Well, Thembekile, government gets to be challenged on a day-to-day on its decisions, and maybe rightly so. We also even have other businesses and civil society which are actually writing to the president, even prior his declaration of the state of disaster, that can you please declare disaster? We need to have at least surety that government has a plan, of which now it has been given an energy plan and its key pointers on what the Minister of Electricity should be doing. Tomorrow he's going to be responding to some of the questions we are raising with regard to what he was doing rounds in the power stations, what he defined, what is the concrete solid plan of government, short-term, medium-term, long-term, to get us out of load shedding. So I think it's how government runs. It needs to be given a chance and an opportunity to look into issues, plan for them, give measures to communities and our people, explain them. They also have the right to question them.
The issue isn't so much the planning. The issue that many people are grappling with tonight is why that planning and the action would have required a disaster declaration that's lasted less than 6 months to have happened, when there's been so much time and so much announced about what government intended to do. Even in winter last year, President Ramaphosa had made some pronouncements about a plan which would then be implemented to deal with the situation. So did we really need a disaster declaration, or was it really a PR exercise to show that government was taking the situation seriously? You've just told us, for example, that there was business knocking at your door saying, what are you doing about this situation? And perhaps, is that why the decision was made, to appease concerned voices rather than arriving at an informed decision that was absolutely necessary?
It was a decision that was necessary. Remember, it's not always every time when a call is made to government, then government will assent to it. Because government, even when a call is made or a call is not made, its primary responsibility is to ensure that it governs, it delivers services, and it makes the lives of our people better. And in doing so, you will be reviewing yourself on a day-to-day basis. And that is what this circumstance is about. So it is not about, then it will mean appointment of the Minister of Electricity. It's just an exercise, which I don't think, I'm sure you must have seen his work in the past 2-3 weeks in ensuring that there is a coordination, planning, and rollout of ensuring that all the needed facilities, the needed systems, the needed processes are in place to ensure that Eskom is streamlined to provide services or electricity and energy in this instance. So it was not necessarily a wish that because people called for it and then it will be given. Government doesn't operate like that. We call for many things and we may not be able to receive them, but there will always be an explanation and a justification of why a decision is taken and why a decision is not taken. A litigation is not necessarily the only thing that would have made government to either consider or not to consider the withdrawal. But yes, at the time of its discussion, when it came to us, we were saying our day-to-day review with regard to the disaster itself and the response coordinated by Eskom, the departments related into this matter, indicates that we can be able to even manage better after the appointment of the Minister of Electricity. And we began working towards the withdrawal of the disaster.
So you've just said, Minister, that litigation is not necessarily the only thing that would have informed decision. That suggests that it was part of the factors considered. Is that correct?
Well, yes. When you are litigated, you get papers. You need to respond to them. And you look into yourself. And it's not a process that it's arising out of a litigation. So why would you go to court and still take government time instead of making sure that you deliver services and go and talk on a thing that you already know you are working towards, reviewing it and putting it aside?
You knew that under current circumstances you would lose that case.
Well, it's not a lose. You will call it, it will have been a case that is moot, really. It's
but you would have lost then if the parties had failed to had succeeded in making the argument that it wasn't necessary to have had the declaration.
No, Thembekile. The argument was this will allow the excessive use of finances without following processes and procedures. It was not actually saying the system is not supposed to be there. Yes, the argument was also that you have had enough time as government in your planning since 2008 of dealing with energy and its challenges. You knew as government. But as of February, me and you know very well, we were all as citizens not comfortable in the state our country was with regard to energy shortages and the possible blackout that was looming in our country. And government acted in relation to that. So yes, you can't say the president must then say, because we knew in 2008, I'm not going to do anything to fast track this. Let's take it a municipal point of view. You have got a sewer and a sewer treatment plant. You have got water reservoirs which are running on pumps. And you know a tripping and a trap of electricity does create a problem and it burns some of the parts. And you expected them without stock that you will not have water. They will not use mechanisms. So now they are going to ensure that their storage facilities are equipped with the equipment that they need to fastly repair and your sewer runs so that you are able to run down your toilet, you are able to get water for your own daily use. The impact of the disaster was beyond the switching on and off of a light and a bulb globe.
Okay.
But remember, hospitals needed water, which the municipality must provide. So in the absence, the pump is not working. A municipality could quickly procure a tank and place it in a hospital, in a school, in an old age home, equip SASSA, for example, electronically with pay points that needs to be able, so that they can be able to transact to social services or their social recipients. So that if you look at the state of disaster, it was not necessarily talking about the bulb of electricity or energy, but the impact that load shedding as well has across the spheres of government.
And continues to have. Just final question, I want to ask you about what this disaster declaration was also meant to do around the ease in procurement and getting along with some of the issues that were basically often bogged up in red tape. What happens now? Will Eskom still be able to do that?
Well, remember the PFMA also has measures, even when you are outside the disaster, of what you need to do, the process that you need to apply to ensure that you can still arrive at the same decision at a relatively lesser time than the normal period of procuring that you will be. And Eskom can still be able to utilize that. The minister explained it as well in terms of what their plan involves for all the power plants and the turbines that they are running, to ensure that at least there is no disturbance or distractions to the plan that they have of repairing our stations and make sure that there's power that gets to be delivered to our people.
Cooperative Governance Minister Thembi, Nkadimeng, good to have your time, ma'am. Thank you.